Hello everyone, welcome to the first of the Keats-Shelley Association of America's online interviews for 2021. Today I am going to introduce you to Amy Wilcoxon, who will be interviewing Rob Shakespeare of Keats House Museum in Hampstead, London. Amy, who is conducting the interview today, is one of our communications fellows for the year 2020 to 21. She is a PhD researcher at the University of Nottingham. She is editing the letters of the Scottish Romantic poet Thomas Campbell. Amy spends a lot of her time lurking in archives, which is why she has been working particularly on the archive posts for the K-SAA blog. And she has completed placements and volunteered at the Boots Archives and Records Centre, Chatsworth House, Nottingham City Museums and Galleries, and the D.H. Lawrence Birthplace Museum. She is also an avid Byron fan and begins a research placement at Newstead Abbey in February 2021. Amy is interviewing Rob Shakespeare, who is principal curator at Keats House Museum. He has led the Keats 200 project, marking the bicentenary of John Keats's time at the house with a series of exhibitions, events, and digital initiatives. Previously, Rob worked as a history teacher before moving into the museum sector as an education officer in Enfield, and then as education manager, followed by museums and archives manager at the Museum of Croydon. So this is the very first K-SAA recorded interview that we are doing, and I'm delighted to have two such exciting people to start it all off. So I'm going to hand straight over to Amy, who is conducting the interview today.
Thanks so much, Anna. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you, Rob, for being here. I'm so excited to chat to you today.
It's a pleasure. It's a real great opportunity to talk about Keats House and Keats 200 for your audience. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. So I thought I'd start off by just asking a little bit about Keats House itself and why is it so significant?
Yeah, so Keats House was in Keats's day known as Wentworth Place. So the house itself is in Hampstead, North London, and in Keats's time was known as Wentworth Place. It was built between 1814 and 1816. And for those of you that know it or have seen a picture, painting or photo of it, you'll know it looks like one quite imposing sort of Regency villa, but was divided into two separate homes. And the first two people we know that lived there were the Dilke family in one, the larger half of the house, and Charles Brown in the smaller side of the house. Keats already knew about Wentworth Place. It was really one of the reasons probably to meet with that circle of people that were living in Hampstead at that time that attracted him to move to Hampstead in 1817. So he lived there for a while, and then sadly in December 1818 his brother Tom died of consumption, now known as tuberculosis, of course, and his first instinct was to go to Wentworth Place, tell his friends there that his brother had died, and he was invited by Charles Brown to come and live with him in his side of the house. So it was a very special place for Keats. It provided him solace, friendship, and a place that nurtured his creativity.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting, though, that over time it actually lost its association with Keats, and it wasn't really till the late 19th century when sort of interest in romanticism and romantic poets was increasing again, that people began to search for his birth, the place where he'd lived in Hampstead. And then it was identified, the plaque went up. It's got a beautiful plaque on the wall at the front of the house there to recognise the association with Keats. And then in the early 19th century, it was actually threatened with demolition, and an international fundraising campaign led by the American poet Amy Lowell was set up to save the house. And then it opened as a museum in 1925. And we're very proud as the City of London Corporation today to maintain it as a house, both for Keats enthusiasts and for all Londoners and the nation as part of our cultural contribution.
Yeah, that's amazing. What an amazing story as well, that it was going to be demolished and then saved like that. It's astounding. And did Keats write some of his he wrote some of his more famous poetry there as well, if I remember, if I've done my research correctly.
Yeah, it was a very special place. So hopefully if you have or get the chance to visit, you'll know that Keats rented 2 small rooms, a parlour and a bedroom. But that parlour in the house is really the sort of heart of the home and the story of Keats living there. And it's there that he would have read widely and written and worked on his own poetry as well. The most famous poem associated with the house is Ode to a Nightingale. There's a story by Charles Brown that one day Keats just got up after breakfast. He heard a nightingale singing in the garden or nearby. The house then was very close to the heath and not really surrounded by other residences as it is today. And Keats just got up, walked out into the garden, sat under the plum tree and wrote Ode to a Nightingale. So that's the one that is most closely associated with the house. But of course, he lived there during his most creative period from late 1818 through the spring and summer of 1819. Was really, as you know, when he wrote most of the poems for which he's now most loved and famous. And those are really closely associated with the house, maybe apart from To Autumn, which of course was written elsewhere, but it was still during a period where he was being nurtured and saw Wentworth Place as his home. So we still think that's got a special association too.
Such an integral part of Keats' scholarship and Keats's history. That's amazing. I'm going to turn to you now, Rob, if that's all right, and ask you a couple of questions about yourself and your kind of links to Keats House. So how long have you worked at Keats House for, and what experience did you have kind of beforehand that led you into the role of principal curator? We know you're a teacher as well, so that's a really cool sort of pathway.
So I joined 3 years ago now. I'm just coming up for the 3rd anniversary. It seems to have flown by in lots of ways. But I was appointed to lead on and deliver the Keats 200 bicentenary and a number of other major projects, including the refurbishment of the house, which the City of London Corporation completed just last year, just before we went into the first lockdown. So we've got a beautifully restored and maintained house now, which will be fit for the next 5-10 years at least, and that's an important part of any museum manager, of course, to maintain the buildings and make sure the collections within it are safe. But yeah, the Keats 200 bicentenary was sort of the main reason I was appointed. And I guess my experience in community engagement and working, particularly with digital and online projects, and I guess working with young people as well, that's really important to me. Obviously, the audience for Keats House is very broad and diverse. But we've got a particular interest, I think, during the Keats 200 bicentenary in telling this story, perhaps most to those that actually don't know it. And those people that know me well know, actually, I didn't know much about Keats when I joined the house. And I've been fortunate to work with and alongside some very knowledgeable and talented people, including Anna herself, who was at the house when I first arrived. But together, I think that they've taught me a lot about Keats and why this place is so special. And hopefully, I've played a part along with the team there and all our Keats 200 partners in bringing that story to new audiences. So yeah, it was probably based on some of my earlier experience. I was a teacher, as Anna and yourself said, for many years in North London, teaching history and humanities. And then I saw an opportunity one day to move into museum education, complete an MA in museum education, something I didn't really know existed. And then sort of, I suppose, found, I hope, my calling a bit, really. It's a really great opportunity to combine lots of different things I'm interested in.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing.
Projects and so on. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that sounds great, and such a cool career path as well. I'm quite jealous of your job, to be honest.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you quickly one more question about your kind of role as curator, and then we're going to move on to talking about the bicentenary plans. But I just wanted to ask you briefly, what is the best thing about being curator at Keats House?
Well, I think for me, what is most different about it from my previous experience is that one sole, single but very special connection with an individual. I suppose my experience before had been much more general, both in Enfield and at Croydon. Those local authority museums tended to deal with sort of, big, important national and international stories, but through the eyes of local, ordinary people often, particularly at the Museum of Croydon. But they were broad in scope by their nature. They were local history museums that sought to tell the story of their boroughs and make those meaningful for their local residents and audiences. But what impressed me most, I think, when I arrived at Keats House was, even in the first few weeks, I'd come out of my office and sort of there'd be someone stood there in, Keats's bedroom, almost looking like they were at prayer or something. And I'd sort of, ask them where they come from and why they were visiting. And it became very clear to me very quickly how special it is for people to come and see where Keats actually lived and wrote most of these works. And we hope that the house does have that special sense. A lot of people comment on what a special place, and that they can feel the atmosphere and sort of almost the spirit of Keats still living on there. And that's important, particularly it's very sad at the moment, really, that people can't actually visit inside at the moment, because if we ever needed a sort of sense of stillness and tranquility, it's now, isn't it? But I think our audiences tell us they get that. They feel that real connection with Keats, and that's very special and something that I learned quickly to latch onto and hopefully nurture as well.
That's incredible. It is. I visited, and it is such a special place. I really enjoyed my visit when I came. But now I'm just going to move on to talking about the obviously bicentenary celebrations. 2021 is a big year for Keats fans, and a big year for you guys as well at Keats House, obviously. So I wondered if you could tell us about the ongoing Keats 200 celebrations. Has the shift to online kind of affected your plans at all? Have there been new opportunities that have arisen from this? And I know you've got partnerships with individuals and things like with Layla Sumpton and Poetry versus Colonialism, and Elaine, who's your artist in residence. Like, can you tell us a bit more about these partnerships and your plans?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for being so knowledgeable and aware of all the different strands of work we're trying to do as part of the bicentenary. You're right. 2021 is obviously a very special year for followers of Keats and fans of Keats. But to be honest, for me, the bicentenary was always a longer celebration, really, of Keats's life. And it's for that reason that shortly after I arrived, we determined that we were going to actually launch the Keats 200 bicentenary in December 2018. And the reason we chose that date is going back to the comment I made about Keats coming down to the house on the anniversary of Tom's death. And so we chose that as a key date, obviously a sad date in Keats's life, but it was actually a date that significantly marked his relationship with Wentworth Place, now Keats House. And already by that time, although it's evolved greatly and inevitably had to change significantly in the last 9 to 12 months, what we've tried to do during that time is have a broad and sort of diverse and varied approach to the work we undertook as part of the Keats 200 umbrella. So even some of the big projects that sound probably a bit dull to some people, like, you know, the building maintenance project. That's an important part of Keats 200 because it means that that house is looked after, maintained and preserved for the future. But my main concern was engagement. I really wanted to use Keats 200 as a way of broadening and diversifying our audiences and looking at Keats's work in a new light, and looking at how we could develop new interpretations and therefore diversify our audience and get different voices heard as well as part of the project. So there were some things that we initiated straight away. So we used live interpreters. So we developed a Keats character and eventually, well, straight away a Charles Brown character and then a Fanny Braun character and a Joseph Seven character towards the end, working with very talented company, Andrew Ashmore and Associates. And they're really expert at researching and bringing historical events to life. And they keep it very sort of, you know, it's very appropriate for its time, but it sort of immediately engages you with the past is what I find really fascinating about it. So we've had a whole strand of live interpretation where we've recreated events. One of my favourite actually was Keats meeting Coleridge on Hampstead Heath. And that was a real opportunity to sort of take Keats 200 out to a new audience. So we sort of bumped into loads of people on Hampstead Heath that day, really no knowledge of Keats at all, but just got swept up in what we were doing and sort of, you know, then came to visit the house. But we've done a range of events like that. We did a day where Keats recreated a day in the life of Keats in the aftermath of the Peterloo massacre. And that was important to me, both in my social history background, but also trying to connect Keats's life story with different events during his life that you wouldn't naturally associate with him, maybe. And that whole story of his sort of radical politics and dissent at the time proved a really sort of interesting way to look at Keats in a new perspective. And I remember Richard Margraf Turley there doing a talk for us, looking at how that experience of the aftermath of Peterloo actually could have come through in Keats's work, particularly to Autumn, that was written shortly after. So, you know, you can see there the germ of things that was sort of an essential component, really. It was that live engagement, working with new audiences, working with partners, working with academics who could tell the stories behind some of the poems and actually look at some interesting angles to those stories. But there's been all sorts of different strands. We've worked, when I arrived at the house, there was an established group called Keats House Poets. So they were young poets who actually joined for the Cultural Olympiad back in 2011-12. And they do great work. Many of them established poets in their own right now. Lila is one of that group who you mentioned, so Lila Sumpton. But we've had a number of residencies, Anthony Hett, Simon Mole. I'm going to forget someone and then I'll feel awful. Dean Atter. All looking at Keats in different ways and from different perspectives to engage. And they've got big audiences and followers of their own as well. Our artist in residence, that was new for us really at Keats House. So Elaine Dwiggenon, who's been doing some beautiful work during lockdown, documenting the garden and the heath and the close connections between sort of botanical issues and Keats's work, and she's just put a beautiful installation in at Keats House that will get really revealed as part of the culmination of Keats 200 to mark his death. That's really special, and that will still be there when the house is reopened as well. What else?
Endless things.
So many other things. Well, I think you might talk about this later, but I include things like the trainee programme, making sure that young people had access to new career paths. But I think you might ask me a little bit about that now.
I'll ask you now.
Yeah, do.
I was just gonna ask you. Keats House has had a really, really great reputation for engaging young people with both the House of Story and Keats himself. So I wondered, if you could tell us a little bit more about I know you do a cultural heritage trainee program, and with your background, you do a lot of work with schools. So I wondered if you could sort of, just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So the cultural, the trainee program was with an organisation called Culturand, who've got a great track record of working with young people and diverse communities to create new pathways into the heritage sector, which, as we all know, can be quite a hard sector to gain particularly paid work in. And so Culturand were supported by HLF to create these trainee posts, and they were New Museum School was the program name, and we were very fortunate to have two very talented trainees. I mean, they were all great across the whole cohort. I was fortunate enough to meet and speak to many of them, working with lots of institutions across London and the South East region. But the two we had at Keats House were great. They did huge amount of work for us on digital programming, social media campaigns, and obviously built our audiences on social media. And that was particularly important through Keats 200, and of course became more and more important as the lockdowns really hit. That was one of our only ways of reaching our audiences. But you're right, we do much more work beyond that, directly with young people ourselves. So we had an active schools programme, and that will come back on stream, and to some extent is still going. It was a great credit to our learning officer that they delivered summer school last year during the pandemic. So, they delivered that online. And actually, and we'll probably talk about this with the wider events as well, got more engagement online because, of course, you can let more people in. So there's virtual summer school was incredibly successful. We're working with our colleagues and partners in London Met Archives, London Metropolitan Archives, another City Corporation institution, and Culture Mile, which is City of London Corporation backed initiative. So we're working directly with them to create fusion skills sessions for schools, particularly with London Met Archives. You can have a dual site visit to them and us and experience life in Regency London. And one of the saddest casualties actually of lockdown, but one of the projects I'm probably still most proud of is we'd approached Chicken Shed Theatre, which some of you will know has a great track record of youth engagement and theatre engagement, workshops for young people and disability arts. We'd approached them. I live in Enfield myself, so I was aware of their work, but obviously Keats himself had an Enfield and Edmonton connection through his schooling and apprenticeship in Edmonton. So I was really keen to get an Enfield connection in our Keats 200 programme, and they worked with a group of young people through their young company and created a beautiful site-specific performance for Keats House, which it still chokes me a little bit thinking of it. We were literally rehearsing in the house when we realised we'd have to close it and wouldn't be able to perform it. It was due sort of 2 days after the lockdown, and I had to break it to them. But that's sitting there. Although some of those young people will inevitably have moved on, we've still engaged there with 20 odd young people that were listening and hearing Keats's story for the first time, really took it on board over a series of workshops, and then created this incredibly moving theatre performance piece, which hopefully at some point we will get them, or at least some of them, to perform.
That all sounds amazing. Like I'm quite jealous. I wish I lived in London. So I could do all these things when I was younger. But yeah, I was just going to move on now to talk about the online aspect of things again, if that was all right. Obviously, it is, as you said, advantageous at times. So I know you've got online exhibits being released on the Our City Together website. So I've seen you've got loads of Fanny Braun's letters to Fanny Keats. You've got Keats's last letter on there. There's a really cool virtual tour of the house through video, text and images that I had a great time going through. And you've just started doing Feast of the Poets events as well. I attended the first one a couple of weeks ago, and that was great. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about the online stuff that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's one of the great success stories, really, isn't it, of the past year, how people have adapted and, use their creativity to reach new audiences through online sources and channels. We were fortunate, of course. City Corporation is a huge organisation that represents some really important cultural institutions like Museum of London, Guildhall Art Gallery, Guildhall Library. Keats House is one of those, and all those organisations got together and created the Our City Together platform. And so if you go to their ourcitytogether.london, you can see a range of sort of resources and virtual experiences from the City of London Corporation's cultural venues, and something really important that we can sort of look back on with pride, I think, that we created that in such a short time. And we were delighted to contribute to it. We've not got much of an online presence, really, other than that and our social media. So our social media had been growing in importance for a number of years. Anna actually herself was in charge of it, really, when I arrived at the house, and she taught me a great deal about how it was working and what audiences we were able to reach through that. So straight away I could see that was going to be a real asset for the Keats 200 programme. And so we took certain approaches to that. I was really keen that Keats 200 followed the chronology of Keats's story through that time. And so we established this, that, the On This Day feature is quite well recognised right across social media and other platforms. But we really hooked into that as a way of telling the story of Keats 200. So we've been releasing letters and poems and so on the day they were written, or the day that was significant for them. And more recently, we have been able to expand into sort of virtual events, a bit tentatively at first. Lila was actually instrumental in this, her Poetry versus Colonialism workshop, which I'm delighted to say she led. We sort of hosted it, but she led. And that really demonstrated to me how successful those live workshops can be in engaging audiences. And one of the most interesting things I thought about that was, although the workshop itself was great, looking at different aspects of the Keats House collections with a colonial lens and looking at those colonial collections, actually quite a lot of people stayed on the meeting afterwards, and it just developed into a sort of interesting conversation about those topics. And it really made me think back to our live events when we're at the house, and often, yeah, of course, the events are great, but often the sort of really interesting cultural creative stuff takes place afterwards, when you sort of meet new people and you hear a snatch of a conversation that triggers something in your mind. And then I was reading about Leigh Hunt. I can't remember what I was researching now, but I was looking for something else. I was reading about Leigh Hunt and came across this Feast of the Poets. And it seemed to me the ideal forum to have a sort of informal, and a bit off the cuff, off message conversation about poetry and the role of poets. And I thought that really resonates with me. I'm sure that would work. And if we get the right people in the room and I just sort of introduce them and then shut up and let them speak, we'll have a really interesting conversation. And that's what happened So we're with Professor Ian Haywood from Roehampton University, who is one of our Keats 200 partners, who's supporting our research student placement. Herself was there, and Lila, and we're just debating various aspects of poetry today and the importance of poets and how that's changed over time. And the next one, so we're going to aim to make it monthly, last Friday of every month, 5 o'clock. Have a little bit of sort of relaxing time talking about contemporary issues in culture and poetry in particular. So next one is going to be, what's so great about Keats? I'm going to get 3 people. Very lucky to have Professor Nicholas Rowe, Keats' biographer, next time. We're going to have Julia Bird and Mike Sims from the Poetry Society looking at how to engage people with Keats' work today. And we're also having Elaine Dwiggen looking at Keats' work as an inspiration to a visual artist. So that'll be a fascinating debate as well.
That'd be amazing. Yeah, and that's on the 26th of February at 5 o'clock. Everybody needs to attend that, obviously.
Thank you. Yeah,
so
now on Eventbrite. Well done, Amy.
So I just wanted to ask you quickly before we bring it to a close, I guess, what's next for Keats House after the bicentenary celebrations? Are you still gonna do online events when the world's back to normal? What are your plans, or can you plan at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and something that I've been mulling over for the past 3 to 6 months, really, because inevitably Keats 200 comes to an end, although I do hope it's got a long legacy, really, and we will continue to talk about Keats 200 and its legacy programmes and still badge things as Keats 200 projects. But you're right, all projects come to an end, and the bicentenary of Keats's death will be the culmination in many people's minds of that programme. So next for Keats House really is to use Keats 100 as a model for its future activity. The benefit of it has been to work with such a wide and interesting range of partners, all with different knowledge and experience and sort of requirements, really, from Keats. And it's about keeping places alive and relevant today, isn't it? So I think my job now turns very much into planning for Keats House over the next 3 to 5 years. We're an accredited museum that is on pause at the moment, the accreditation programme, but that frames all our work, and that's an important aspect of any museum's job, is to make sure its buildings, its collections, its audiences are cared for and looked after. And to do that, you have to have a bewildering array of policies and programs, right? So there's a real job to do there, but more importantly, at the heart of that is the real work that shapes and drives. So for me, things like the Fanny Braun to Fanny Keats letters that you referred to, that actually is a really interesting project that developed out of Keats 200. I wouldn't have known about those at all. But I'm guessing many people actually that know about Keats don't really know about those letters. And it's a correspondence between 2 women who lived 200 years ago, who knew Keats, intimately and well, and then obviously begin their relationship based on Keats, but then that relationship grows beyond and outlives him. So it's using Keats's life and works to look at lives in the 19th century. Look at women's lives, and Lila's work, I hope, or components of Lila's work will continue. There's clearly throughout the 19th century close connections between England and its empire, and those stories need to be told through our collections. And in that way you can relate people's life stories today to events 200 years ago and give them meaning and shape in meaningful ways. So there's some really interesting projects like that will continue. And I referred to it right at the beginning. Keats House actually opened as a museum in 1925. And I think my next sort of staging post really for the museum is to look at how we reinterpret the house for that anniversary. And things like the research student program, Techne funded program we're working with Roehampton on, they will look very much at things like Fanny Keats's life at the house, which is told at the house now, but it's probably told through the prism of Keats. I think Anna might agree with that. It is told through Keats's eyes, but actually Fanny Braun lived at the house much longer than Keats did. And eventually Fanny Keats comes to live with her at the house. So there's a fascinating story to tell there. And I think the 100th anniversary of the house opening as a museum, all tied up with the formation of the charity that protects it through till this day, Keats House is a registered charity, will actually frame a lot of our work over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. And it, with your like you said, the refurbishment and everything as well, getting everything ready, it sounds like you'll still be going at Keats 300 and Keats 400. The house will still be there.
I'm not sure I will be, but the house will be.
Before we finish, I just wanted to ask quickly, where's the best place to find out more about Keats House and the Keats 200 celebrations? Is that your website and social media?
Yeah, very much. Thank you for bringing that to your audience. So yeah, cityoflondon.gov.uk/Keats. You'll find links off there, and on our social media, you'll find a link on there to Linktree and Keats House Museum, and that has a list of all our Keats 200 projects individually, so you can click on those individual links on the projects you're interested in. And certainly our social media, follow us on Twitter at Keats House, and on Facebook and Instagram, Keats House Museum, or use hashtag Keats200 to see all the range of projects going on. And particularly, we've just launched it today really, but from the 15th to the 23rd of February, we'll be telling the story of Keats's life and the Keats 200 bicentenary through sort of 9 days of intensive social media activity and online activity, and all that will be showcased on those sites and on our City Together London, so do look out there.
Thank you very much, Rob. Yeah, I've really enjoyed chatting to you today. I really enjoyed Keats House when I visited it, and it's so nice to hear more about it from somebody as knowledgeable about the house and the events as you. So yeah, thank you so much for chatting today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for giving us the platform. It's really much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you very much everybody for watching too.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy and Rob, for such a fascinating interview today. I'll just say that we will put links to all those things we discussed in the interview on the K-SAA blog. So we'll put links to the forthcoming online events, as well as all that amazing online exhibition content that Rob talked about from Keats House too. It was really fascinating, especially to hear about those emotional reactions people have in Keats House, how, like you said, the kind of spirit of Keats is what people react to when they come to the building and spend time in the rooms, and really makes me miss going there. So it was really nice to talk about that. And I think just to note that we should look out for more interviews like this from us, the Keats-Shelley Association of America, and I'm sure we'll be hearing plenty more from Keats House in the forthcoming months.